I appreciate the offer to speak this evening for this healer's presentation. What I want to talk about tonight is my healing practice. And so I'm going to talk about what I usually consider the 5 W's, which is what, why, who, where, when, and then the reverse W, which is how. So it's really kind of 5 plus 1 inversed. But I believe when we talk about prayer and devotion, I always say that prayer and devotion arise out of need. And typically, we turn to powers greater than ourselves when we need something, because they're the ones who can really, kind of change the laws of the universe, or not have to follow the laws of a 3-dimensional universe. And oftentimes we are first moved towards prayer via need when someone is not well. So when we have a sick pet, a sick goldfish, a sick relative, ourselves are sick, our parents are sick, we often, out of need and desire, ask for help. And I think that this is the beginning of in some ways, prayer and asking for things. So I know that's my experience. When I was younger, I had pets and they would get sick. And I mean, some pets have a very short life cycle. And so as things would start to go change with them, I would call out to the powers that be for help with that. And so I think that's really where the beginnings of prayer come about. How do I see myself in relation to the healing process? The word healing is kind of a funny word. I mean, here amongst ourselves, we can be a little more not so worried about the legal ramifications of it. But I do consider myself a little bit of a healer. I've done some healing work with people present, and I've done some very limited work with people or things at a distance. I know others have done so with much more regularity and much more success than myself. I first noticed that I took some healing courses earlier in my career, and actually the most, I think, profound healing courses that I had were part of Rosicrucianism. They have a healing component that is actually, I think, quite good. And so what I did is I took that learning and I applied it in some different ways that I think that they anticipated its usage. But what I also did is in the early days of the internet, when we didn't have Facebook or things of that nature, I did some healing practices using what then were known as chat rooms. And I found that on occasion, there was really the ability to connect with people kind of energetically. And it wasn't something that was consistent, but it was something that happened on occasion. And it was something that after a while, I was able to recognize when that connection was established. So as my own practices developed, what I ended up doing was developing a healing practice that had to do with prayer, where I felt that I was an intermediary or a conduit in helping people to find the healing they were looking for. So let's talk about what. So what really is healing? I think that whenever there's a deficiency in people's systems, whether it's health or mortality or things of that nature, there is a desire to reach out to folks and help them. And I think that the one caveat I have about that, and you see evidence of this in the healing work that this group here does, is that I really think it's important that we have their permission to do so. We all see people who need help, but people may not want help. And in that case, I think we have to be very careful in interjecting ourselves and our sense of need into their world and their sense of need. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to look for their permission to do the work that we're going to do. There are instances where people are unable to give us that approval, and that's typically when they are not able to respond. And I mean not able to respond in a conscious way. It's not that we can't reach them on the telephone or via messenger or whatever the case may be, but I think it's important that we have their okay to do so. I think that the way healing practices develop or helping practices develop is that we typically want to help those who are closest to us. So those in our immediate realm of influence, so parents, pets, family members, those are the ones that we see most readily, and those are the ones that we work with. I think that what happens is after we do this for some time, we either let others know that we're doing this and they may turn to us and ask for our help, or we may turn to others and say, can I help you with this? And I think either one of those methodologies is acceptable. What I found was that in doing work with my family and those around me, that occasionally others would say, hey, can you help with this? And I think that really was a function of mostly people who were involved in neo-paganism, whether they were witches or druids or whatever people would call themselves. I think that they are a little bit more open to thoughts of that nature, or at least those are the realms that I work in. I don't find myself in other realms. I don't find myself in evangelical circles, and I'm very sure that they also have the need for healing. So the question of what is really what do we do? So for me, it's really finding those who need help and trying to connect them with those who can help. And I kind of stand in the middle, and I try to funnel requests, and for lack of better terms, I try to funnel energy in that direction. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that happens in a little bit. The next thing is really, why do we do this? What's the need for it? Does it really work? Is there why do we keep doing it? And I think that for myself, I have found over time that occasionally I do see results from the work that I do, and I see those results mostly from people reporting to me, as opposed to me being kind of an observer. I don't know that we're all the greatest observers, but I really look to those who I work with to get feedback. There are some people on my list who've been there for years. And what I typically do is, for those who've been on there the longest, is I will reach out once a year and say, hey, how are things going? Because I will talk a little bit more about the mechanisms of it, but I really I work with two lists of entities that I do healing work with. One which is more ad hoc and I would consider short term, and others that I would consider more long term. What's that really about? If someone comes to me and says, I'm having anxiety issues, or I've had this headache for a while, can you help? Those are things that I consider to be short term. Those who come to me typically with issues with cancer, they kind of blend into two lists. One, a more short-term list, but I also put them on what I call a permanent list, because I think that cancer is not a one-time thing. And I think that part of the issue is to get past the initial issues with cancer, and then to keep doing healing or prayerful work for those so that hopefully that condition doesn't return. When someone comes to me with this kind of a situation, with a cancer situation, I do tell them, I'd say, I'd like to put you on this list permanently. Is that okay? And if they say yes, then that's very easy for me. If they say no, well, then that's easy as well. For short-term situations, what I do is I will do a healing working, which I'll describe in more detail in just a little bit. I do healing working, and then I look for feedback from folks. And if I don't get feedback from them over a period of time, I look for what I would call significant or reoccurring events, at which time I will end that prayerful cycle. Usually that's I'll do that at full moons. If I haven't heard anything from anyone in a while, and I've contacted them and they haven't gotten back to me, then I kind of use my intuition and say, I think that they're past this. And so at the full moon, I will quit the work that I'm doing. So that's kind of the approach that I use for these two lists that I use. So who as an intermediary, there's really two ends of that spectrum. The first spectrum is those that are in need. And so those are pretty easy to define because I have a list of people. And for me, working that list is a couple of exercises. One, it's an exercise in recollection, because every day that I do my healing working, I call out their names individually. And so I set up methodologies that I use so that I can remember their names. And I also use methodologies for what I do with them, with that thought. The other part of the equation is who is it that I'm talking to on the divine side, or who is it that I'm trying to connect with on the divine side? And that's another one that's a little bit different, because it's going to vary from person to person. For myself, I come from an Irish hearth culture. Or I should say, I work from an Irish hearth culture. I'm not Irish, but I like the Irish hearth culture. That's how I was kind of raised in paganism, and it's kind of worked for me over a long period of time. So in the Irish healing tradition, there are a series of healers, but there are three that I use predominantly, and they are Diancecht, Miach, and Airmid. So Diancecht is there's the lore behind it. I really don't want to go into it very much. Diancecht was a healer, a very skilled healer. He is the one who created the silver hand for Nuada, who was the king of the Irish for a while. And he gained repute because Nuada had lost his hand. Diancecht created a silver one that was equally functional. His son, Miach, created a better hand. And there's the story basically goes on to tell that Diancecht kills Miach because of his skill. That's what the lore says. I don't know if that's true myself. I have no proof to say that, yeah, that happened. No, it didn't happen. It just seems that I think sometimes really popular deities, especially in Irish traditions, get killed. So nevertheless, Miach is the god of surgery and leechcraft. And so for surgical tasks, I turn to Miach. The leechcraft thing, my father would have been 101 this year. When he was a kid back in the 20s, 1920s, and in the 1930s, when people got sick, they were leeched. That was something that they did. not part of my working by any stretch of the imagination, but the whole idea of leechcraft, it does have a historical precedence, one that, is not that really far distant from what we do. So if there's surgical workings to be had, then I look to Miach, and I'll talk a little bit about the methodology that I use for that. And then Miach had a sister, that's Miach, and he had a sister, Airmid, Airmid, or Airmid, and she's the goddess of earthcraft. And so these are the deities that I predominantly work with. I work with Diancecht, then Miach, and then Airmid, not because of any preference, just because I think that's how I'm introduced to them in war, and that's why I work with them. I also do working with Frige, who is a latter day goddess. She comes on the scene a little bit later, but Frige is very accessible, I believe, to people. This is my own UPG. I think a lot of people work with Frige. I think that she is very open to working with humans, where other deities maybe are a little more distant. So those are the four deities that I work with. My devotional practice is complicated and lengthy. So the three family members, Diancecht, Miach, Airmid, I work with together, and then Frige I work with a little further on. When I do work with these entities, I tend to I do work for members of the nature spirits, meaning pets, etc., and I do work for members of the human race. So I do those together, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Another W is, where do you do this work? Really any place you're comfortable in doing it. I think it's really important when you do healing work that you have the ability to focus on the work that you're doing. And, whether you do your work at your altar or someplace else, that's really a choice for you. I wouldn't be too married to one location in case you aren't there, in case you're on holiday. My workings are done on a daily basis. So I'm not always here. So if I'm not here, then I move someplace else, or I do it someplace else. So let me tell you a little about my wear. I'm a runner, and I run on a daily basis, or I try to run on a daily basis. And one of the things that I do is I do my devotional practices when I'm running. I run a certain distance during the week and a different distance on the weekends, but I have signposts along the way that I use to begin my practice. So I usually run. I try to get myself in a kind of a state of mind to do the work that I'm going to do, and that usually takes me about a half a mile. So after a half a mile, I start in on my work, my daily devotionals. They are not all healing based, so I'm going to just concentrate, for the sake of this discussion, on the healing component. What I do is I like to set up a timbre or a rhythm in the work that I do, because I find that using rhythm helps me to work through the process that I've developed. Because I have a lot of names that I go through, it helps me kind of set that rhythm and go through the names, like a roll call. For yourself, you don't need to have a huge list. I mean, I started with a small list and it grew over time. So what I like to do is, when I do healing working for folks, I like to know their names, as opposed to saying Jim's dad or Sam's mother. I actually want to know what their names are. It helps me to feel a little more involved or intimate with their situation. And I think that it makes just a difference. it also really, really helps if you know what they look like. Give you an example. There's a person who attends the weekly um, solitary rites whose mother's been ill. And so I've been doing devotional work for him and her. And last Tuesday night, I did the solitary rite, and she was there. So I got to see her. Really helps. I mean, a photograph is a great thing, but to see someone live is a really, really interesting thing, because that way it creates an image link between the work and what you're about to do. Because I think it helps if you can see that. Depending on the number of people, you may have to decide how you're going to approach more than one person. If you're just working with one person, that's actually pretty simple. You just focus on that person, and then there's a couple things that need to be done. Kind of the what, and that is, I like to have a prayer or some kind of saying that I use when I work through this list. And the reason I do that is because it helps me be consistent throughout the practice, and it also helps me fall into that rhythm. So, for example, when I work with Diancecht, I will say, hail, Diancecht, heal. Just hail. I like to use the word hail to get their attention. Since I'm running, I don't have a bell, I'm just running. So I say hail. Hail, Diancecht, heal. Heal my mother of that jails. And I use that as an example. That's the first one that I use on a daily basis. And then I say hail, Diancecht, heal. And then I go through this list and I say that particular thing. And what I try to do is, when you're doing moving devotionals, it's a little more difficult to concentrate on the individuals while you're moving on a trail than it is to be thinking about the healing process. So for me, I'm just trying to call up to Diancecht to lend his energy as I'm just kind of a conduit to these individuals. And what I do is I have separated the deities that I'm working with groups of people that I feel are grouped by need. So Diancecht is for those that I'm most intimately involved or aware of their situations. People have come to me on Facebook and say, "Hey, my son is sick. Can you help?" And so those, I don't feel that same sense of intimacy because I really don't know them. And so for Diancecht, this is what I do. For Miach, the surgery and leech map, this is where I do the bulk of my work, because I think that Miach is really kind of all pervasive in the lore. In the lore, when Miach is killed, 365 herbs spring up from his body, one for every day of the week, or one for every day of the year, I mean. And so these are all healing herbs. And so I feel that his healing abilities or presence is fairly much very pervasive. And it's really Airmid, the goddess who's working on gathering these herbs, and then something happens, but that's another story. So what happens with when I do my working with Miach is I also go through this rhythm or this kind of list of people. And so I just call out to Miach and I call their names. And what I say may vary from person to person, but the one important part of the Miach work is this is where the cancer workings are included. And so it occurred to me, and this goes back to something that I think is fairly fundamental in magical work, is that you have to imagine the result. You have to think about what you're doing and think about what you want to happen. It's one thing to talk about it, but I think it's another thing to try to make it happen. And I am not saying that by my actions I am in any way um, causing these things to happen, but I think that I'm nudging the universe in such a direction. So what I do is and some of this developed very organically, but what I do is when I go through the list of people who are cancer folks, at the very end, um, I do these movements, and I'll show you what these movements are. It's like basically, I take my hand, use my left, and I kind of sweep my body. The idea is I try to sweep, like from here, down to my knees. And the idea is that I'm trying to grab these, the infirmities, and then I get rid of them. So I do this 3 times, and then I go up and I go down. I do that twice. And so I do the 3, I do that 4 times, and the 2, I do that 3 times. And it just so happens that it occurred to me one day after I've been doing this for a while that that's actually 27 movements. So 3 times 3, which I thought was significant and kind of unexpected. And then every time I do that, I kind of let it go. I try to release it. And at the very end of that, I said, drive the cancers from their bodies, never to return. So that's part of the working and part of a prayer, because I think there are vocalizing what you're doing really helps. I think it helps for you to hear it, and I think it helps for the universe to hear it as well. And I don't really, since I'm running, I want to kind of conserve my breaths. I'm not like, drive the cancer from their bodies, never to return. I don't scream it in the forest. I just go through, a kind of a normal voice kind of thing. And probably people who are driving down the road are like, what is that guy doing? But it doesn't matter. It's what I do. So that's the kind of Miach part of things. When people have surgery, what I like to do is I ask them if they don't mind, if they can on their bodies. So let's say they're going to have surgery on the left arm, just as an example. What I ask them to do is somewhere on the left side of the body to draw Miach's name. And I'm going to do it for you, and I'll show you here. Bear with me a second. So this is Miach's name in Oam. It's Miach. And what I ask them to do is I ask them to put that on their body as kind of a link to the deity, to kind of be present in their surgery. And I always say, when I'm discussing people who need Miach service, I always say, guide the doctor's hand, skillfully guided by your hand. So the idea is that Miach is helping the doctor to do these things. That's my prayer, and that's what I envision as this happens. I did this for myself. I had knee surgery many years ago, and I drew this that clip on my leg, and when I got to the operating room, they're like, "What is this?" And I said, "Well," I explained it to them as they gave me anesthetic, so they probably got half the story, or not very much of the story. But the idea is just to try to create a link between the work and the deed. And I think it's important I think it's helpful for the patient to have that, and also an intermediary to have it, like myself or like another family member. And that's just my methodology. It doesn't have to be something that you do, but it's something that I found is effective, and I think that it creates a link in a sense of belonging to the process. That brings us to Airmid. Airmid My work with Airmid is really herbal. So Diancecht, Miach, I see them as more allopathic. So that kind of doctor services, these are physicians or healers that are working, and they're working to make a change in the people who are afflicted. I believe that the shining ones, the gods, have the ability to change the laws of the universe. Not change the laws of the universe, go around the laws of the universe. So they can heal something that we aren't able to heal, not with our hands. Medicine can do many things, but something the gods, I believe. With Airmid, when I do my working with Airmid, it really is about more herbal remedies and the efficacy of herbs. So if I know someone who is using herbal processes to do their healing work, dietary supplements, things of that nature, that's really the section that I use, the Airmid section. And I say, hey, Airmid, goddess of herb craft, is how I begin it. And at the end of all of these things, I always say, I honor and I thank you. I honor and I thank you, Miach. I honor and I thank you, Airmid. Why? Why do I do this? I think it's really important that we thank the deities that we ask. When we ask them to do something for us, or when we interact with them, I think being thankful, and just putting stuff on my instance here, I think it's helpful to be thankful. And to say I honor and I thank you, to me, is an offering. I don't have an offering to make while I'm running. So I don't have anything to give but my own thanks and to say that I honor them. So this is part of the process that I use. The healing work I do at that part of my devotional work is the very beginning of the work. We incorporate that whole group of individuals that kind of came at the front, at the back end of my devotionals using Bridget, because I feel that not that she is less important. I think that she comes on the scene later, historically speaking. So it's not a question of deference, but it's just a question of kind of linear nature of when she shows up. But I use it to kind of bookend the work that I did at the front. So I also ask, Breach. I always say, Hail Breach, goddess and healer of the southern skies. So, why southern skies? Well, I think her, Kildare is a little further south and other parts of Ireland. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But that's how I work with Breach. And I also, at the very end of that, say, I honor and thank you, Breach. And that is how, in a nutshell, I do this work. Say the names all the time. The other thing that I do is I write down the names. Got a Word file on my computer in the cloud that has all these names in it, because I do it for a couple of reasons. One, in the event that I forget something, or two, in the event that something happens to me and I can't remember them anymore. I intend to do this for a long time. Nobody's getting any younger, and so I'm always fearful that if something happens to me, I'll lose that piece of my life, and I don't want to. So I keep those there just to have a list of folks. And as folks come off the list, then I remove them from the list. And that can be because they no longer need my services, or because they've transitioned to the next life. And so in that case, they may be included in ancestral working as opposed to healing work. And it's what I found sometimes is really hard is when you've had somebody who's part of your healing practice for a really long time, and they're gone. I do find time to time that they're back. They're back in my list, and that's just a question of presence, I think, on my part. Maybe I just don't want them to go away. So the other question is when do you use things? And I think it's best really to do these kind of practices when your schedule allows. I think it's difficult to be forced into practice because I think then the efficacy of your work suffers because it's like, I got 10 minutes to do this. I better get this out of the way. That's not the way to approach a healing practice. I think it's really important to approach it as you want to do it because it's part of your practice, now part of your life, and then you have the time to do these things. So for me, I run first thing in the morning. It's an easy time for me. I haven't started my work day yet most of the time, and it's easy for me to just fall into that rhythm of my running and vocalizing of what I'm doing. I personally believe that the best part of healing practice is a daily practice. And I say that because I have the luxury to do so, and because it's just something I built into my life. Even if I don't run, if it's raining or snowing or whatever the case, and I'm not on the trail, I still maintain the ability to do my healing practice. And so find a time, but be flexible as well. If you do this every day at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock and something happens and you can't do it until 9 o'clock, it's not the end of the world. The other thing is, if you miss a day, it's not the end of the world. There are days where we just can't do it for whatever reason. We might be sick, might be whatever, might be an airplane, whatever the case may be. But don't stop your practice because you've had a couple of detours or you've missed a time or two. It's not the end of the world. The work continues, and you can just fall back into that rhythm. Don't be too hard on yourself, and be kind to yourself. The other thing is that as a person who works as a healing intermediary, oh my goodness, I think it's important to realize that you too sometimes need to turn to others for help. We're not monoliths, and so there are times that we need to say, "Hey, I need your help." And so I would encourage people to be open to the fact that you too at some point will need help. And I remember a number of years ago, my mother, I can use a personal example, my mother had stomach cancer, and she was undergoing surgery for it. And I wrote to the Healers Guild. At the time, it was on the Healers Guild. It was on the list, and I asked for prayers for my mother. And there was a great outpouring of prayers out. And my mother recovered from that surgery. I mean, that was a number of years ago. She's 97 now, so it's been at least 15 years. And so, she's around that time period. So I think I made a big difference. The doctor said, "Wow, your mother really healed quickly. She lost 2/3 of her stomach, and all this other stuff, but she kind of bounced back quickly." And I think good thoughts and prayers really make a difference. And I don't think they have to be pagan prayers. They can be whatever kind of prayers, whatever realms. I mean, I can't speak to the ones that I do, but I think that every little bit helps, and I think it does. Prayer and the work that we do is really about nurturing the universe and asking for help from the gods. And I think that the gods are there and that they listen. And I think that sometimes, I mean, if you look at the stories of Diancecht kind of being a bad guy and Miach being bad, in my workings, I still work with them, and I still feel that they are effective and that they are helpful. And that's my experience. Your mileage will vary on whatever deities you use, or you could not have to. You may not want to use deities. You might want to just use the cosmos of the universe. I find directing it at given entities makes a big difference for me, and really helps me focus what I'm trying to do. So, and then whenever you have an opportunity. If you want to make a special offering to these deities, then do so. And I don't think that thank you is never a bad thing. I think the beginning of any practice, you say thank you for what I already have, not for what I want to have. So that, in a nutshell, is my practice. Kind of a 45-minute nutshell, but nonetheless, those are the things that I do, and that's the approach that I use. I really feel it's important to. I think those motions, even those motions might seem kind of silly. I feel that they're doing something. I feel that they're pulling, that they're kind of moving that stuff along. There surely have been people who I've done healing work for who had cancer who passed away. I don't see that as a failing in my work. I just feel that it's, it's the nature of the universe sometimes. You don't last forever. I think every little bit helps. And I think when people know that you're working for them, I think that helps them as well. Not just to maintain a positive attitude, but to know that someone cares. And really caring sometimes is the fuel that makes prayers all that much more. So there you have it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer. Well, thank you so much for having me, and really pleased that you were all here, and thanks for hearing my story. I hope you develop your own practice, and if you have any questions about what I do, or if you need help in your own practices, please let me know. And I know that I've turned to some of you before for help with healing work, and thank you, because it made a huge difference. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Drum. That was awesome.
Thanks. You were a great audience.
It's a lot to take in. I've heard that story before, and still it's like, I think I've heard pieces of it. I've never heard like the whole ritual together of how you do it. It is it makes me think that maybe there's something to be done with a lot more of the walking movement rituals, so we're not all standing in one spot, right?
I think movement's really important, and I think it's kind of like a prayer flag. The idea that a prayer flag is as the wind blows through the flag, it kind of moves that sentiment out there. So I think that as I'm running, I'm kind of moving that stuff through the world. Doesn't mean that a person who's unable to move can't do it, but I'm just saying that that's one way that I can do it. Everybody has their own ways.
And I think that's really funny you brought that up, Drum, because I do mine in the shower with the water running over my face is the movement instead of me moving extra.
And that's brilliant, because it does. Look how far that water goes. It goes really, really far. And that's a wonderful way of doing it. I like that a lot. I think that's brilliant.
Other than writing Miach's name in Ogham on, like, for someone to do that, do you use Ogham as part of your healing practice, like certain Ogham symbols, like sort of a sigil almost? Yeah.
I have made sigils for people depending on the situation. Typically what I do is I'll use the Ogham as kind of a glyph. I think that depending on the situation, the thorns can be helpful. Hawthorn, hua, and strafe, the blackthorn. Use those with care. But I think those are effective because they're good at kind of removing things. Hua is kind of skin deep. Strafe is kind of bone deep, so a little bit different there. But I think that they all have their uses. And for me, if I'm gonna do a bind Ogham, for example, I like to make it triangular, just because I think 3 is a good number. And if you put the 3 Ogham together, the trunks, you get this triangle situation, and you can kind of hash along that. And I think those things are good. And those kind of glyphs can be worn on skin. They can be drawn in the dirt. They can be done a lot of things. They don't have to be permanent. Yes, exactly. And they don't have to be permanent. It's I think that there's something to be said about what I can consider temporary altars, temporary glyphs that last for a period of time and wear away because of just the natural passage of time. So, and I think that if I think by putting, for example, if you, I like using the materials that I find on hand. So if I have like a sidewalk outside my house and I find a stone out there, I don't mind putting an poem, like drawing an poem with that stone, kind of like pseudo chalk on the on my sidewalk, so that people coming into my house or leaving my house, they walk through that poem, they walk through that glyph, and it goes with them. And so, I don't think it's sinister in any sense. I just think it's a benevolent thing. And if people ask, they're like, "What's that thing over there?" I'll be glad to tell them. It's not like I'm trying to, have them do something that's, kind of underhand. That it's just a way of doing it. So yes, I do. Just to answer that. Good question. Well, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Drum. That
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
And thanks for the opportunity. It's good seeing you all. And if I can help in any way, you know where to find me.